And we're starting off with AEW All In, a massive show in Wembley Stadium and a historic night for AEW. But yet again, the biggest story coming out of an AEW pay-per-view isn't what happened on screen. The backstage brawl between Jack Perry and CM Punk has overshadowed this historic event, and we now know far more about what exactly transpired behind the scenes in London. During Wrestling Observer Live, Bryan Alvarez walked fans through the story, saying Perry was getting his cuts tended to after his FTW title match with Hook on the 0 Hour pre-show. Those cuts came after a spot with glass, and as fans heard during the show, Perry had a comment about using real glass in a nod to a recent non-physical confrontation with Punk. As Perry was being tended to, Punk allegedly asked if he has a problem with him, and the former Jungle Boy then replied, "You heard what I said out there." CM Punk fired back saying, "You know, I could beat your ass, right?" Which was followed by a really quick incident in which Punk either shoved or pie-faced Perry, depending on who you ask. One source made it clear that nobody got their ass kicked because Samoa Joe was right there to help break things up as well, as this was shortly before the match between Punk and Joe at All In. Alvarez went on to say that things got so intense so quickly that Tony Khan was almost a victim of the chaos as he sat in the go position, stating, "They got close enough into Tony Khan that I believe monitors were knocked into Tony Khan." CM Punk might not have had the best time in London, and that's not 100% his fault. Things got off to a rocky start when he arrived in London, and it didn't get much better from that point on. House of Wrestling reported that when the real world champion landed in Heathrow Airport on Saturday morning, nobody was there to greet him. With no car service ready, Punk texted the driver number he'd been given by AEW, but the message bounced back as being an invalid number. After waiting in vain for someone and with no other options, Punk bought a train ticket to find his own way to the hotel, but with this being the morning of the bank holiday weekend, the tube was packed with people traveling. Punk got lost in the tube system, and a few fans who spotted the AEW star helped him figure out where he was going, help that Punk was surely very appreciative to receive. A photo has emerged of Punk sitting on a car in London's tube system, as one fan was able to snap a photo with the real world champion, who smiled for the photo despite his travel issues. This photo of Punk quickly went viral as fans can see exactly what Punk, who had expected a private car, had to go through, and it's easy to see why Punk's nerves might have been rubbed a bit raw prior to his backstage confrontation. Perry was not the only person to feel Punk's wrath at All In, as Wade Keller of PW Torch adds that Punk confronted Tony Khan in front of others in the AEW locker room. The interaction was described as heated and intense, with Punk using strong language to address Khan, clearly unhappy with what was going on. It's been reported that Punk was initially hesitant to go out for his match and had threatened to quit the company after the incident with Perry, but that hasn't happened, at least not yet. Bryan Alvarez mentioned that Samoa Joe was extremely frustrated with the situation and had to persuade Punk to fulfill his in-ring obligations, and Punk eventually agreed to the match as planned. After the match, there was said to be a prolonged period of no communication between Punk and Khan, which was said to be unusual given how the pair are often in touch with one another. Punk and Khan may not be speaking to each other for a good while to come, as it's been confirmed that the real world champion and Jack Perry have both been suspended. It was previously only suspected by the roster that a suspension had happened, but confirmation was reached by Sports Illustrated, with Bryan Alvarez later saying that the suspension is indeed real. Fightful Select were also able to confirm this suspension, but we can't say for certain how long either man will be kept off of TV. With CM Punk telling people that he hates this place when he speaks about AEW, he may not be in any hurry to go back, and an investigation will paint a clearer picture of his future with the company. After Sean Ross Sapp reported that Punk had not been made aware of his suspension, Nick Hausman clarified that AEW had not directly informed Punk that he was being benched. Instead, Punk learned about his suspension from his lawyer, who was presumably contacted by AEW, and we have to wonder how Punk reacted when he didn't receive the news from AEW directly. On Wrestling Observer Live, Bryan Alvarez added that Perry wasn't the only wrestler Punk was ready to lock horns with, as after his match, Punk came through the curtain and spoke with Miro. More specifically, Miro asked what happened with Jack Perry, and the on-edge Punk responded, "Oh, you got a problem with me now? You want to step outside?" Things cooled down and Punk would have security escort him to his locker room, and thankfully nothing else happened between Miro and Punk before Punk left Wembley Stadium. Interestingly, Miro would later refute a report saying Perry approached Punk backstage, stepped in his face, and bumped Punk, describing this in a tweet as fake and untrue. Miro would also tweet a photo of a UK taxi cab, which some have called a shot at Punk for not receiving any travel support and having to make his own way through London on the tube. On Wrestling Observer Live, Bryan Alvarez added that FTR and the Bucks had to ask Punk and Joe to open the show, and were told that they would not be opening the All In main card. It was only when Kenny Omega and Hangman Adam Page asked, two men Punk has also had issues with, that the match was able to go ahead as planned, but Joe was said to be furious about the situation. Bryan Alvarez said that the whole CM Punk and Jack Perry drama killed morale within the company, with what should have been the greatest day in AEW history being wholly overshadowed by this latest scandal. Some stars are upset that this very brief physical confrontation took so much attention from the Wembley Stadium show, and whether AEW likes it, we haven't heard the last of this story. Alvarez also made mention of somebody breaking their hand punching a wall backstage at All In, seemingly out of frustration over what had happened with Punk and Perry. It's since come out that this person is Brody King, but Alvarez later tweeted that some in AEW have denied it, saying he instead kicked a garbage can in the aftermath of what happened backstage. Those sources did add that King suffered a hand injury, but rather than by punching a wall, this injury is said to have happened during the House of Black's match when he hit his hand on the guardrail. It's interesting that King was frustrated by what happened at All In backstage, as earlier this year, the AEW star liked a tweet saying Punk did nothing wrong at last year's infamous All Out event. With CM Punk and Jack Perry suspended from AEW, this will obviously affect plans, including for this weekend's All Out, as PW Insider explained. If that is indeed the case, neither would be available to the promotion for this week's Dynamite, Collision, and All Out pay-per-view, which will all emanate from Punk's hometown of Chicago, which puts the promotion in quite the pickle, as he would undoubtedly be the biggest name on the nights he appears for local fans. Punk is AEW's biggest star, and his drawing potential is only galvanized when he's in his hometown, and we can only wonder what the atmosphere will be like at All Out without the Chicago-made star. Of course, this past weekend and last year's All Out aren't the only Punk controversies, as his recent comments about Hangman Adam Page after a Collision taping had everybody talking. Punk's comments, calling Page somebody who can't sell merch and can't draw, were said to be a receipt by Punk in response to an off-the-cuff line from Page from May of last year. This isn't the first time Punk has given Page a receipt for that line, as last year, Punk embarrassed Page by offering him an AEW World's title match, fully aware that Page wasn't at the show. As for the post-Collision comments, PW Insider reports that there is an internal belief within AEW that Punk was fined, and some believe the unnecessary dig at the Cowboy set Punk back 5 figures. No one has, or likely will, go on record to confirm this, but one person who is ready to speak his mind on the matter is Mark Henry. On Busted Open Radio, the AEW correspondent said that Tony Khan has given the roster grace and guidance, but he questioned, when is the kick in the ass coming in? Henry added that when mistakes are made, consequences must happen, and wants to remind Punk and Perry that we're working for the company, we're working for the business. Hopefully, we will get more answers about this situation tonight on Dynamite, and this weekend at All Out, but once more, the biggest stories in AEW are by no means what we're seeing on TV. Before the shocking and tragic death of Bray Wyatt, WWE had plans in the works for his return to TV, and for a long time, it appeared that Wyatt's return would also spark a comeback for Uncle Howdy. Uncle Howdy, believed to be played by Bo Dallas, appeared on WWE programming shortly after Bray's return last October, but this mysterious character may not be finished just yet. During a backstage segment on this week's Raw between Finn Balor and Damian Priest, fans may have noticed the Uncle Howdy shirts in the background, a possible hint of the character's return. With that said, this subtle inclusion could have been nothing more than a tribute to Bray Wyatt, particularly as Raw featured multiple tributes to the late superstar. Howdy's last appearance on WWE television was in March 2023 during an episode of SmackDown as part of the Wyatt-Bobby Lashley feud that sadly never came to fruition. Would you like to see Uncle Howdy back on TV? And do you think WWE will bring the character back? Let us know in the comments. Now, Bianca Belair is one of the most popular superstars WWE has on its current roster, but with that said, the EST won't be around on TV for a period of time. During the August 18th SmackDown, Belair and Charlotte Flair teamed up to defeat Io Sky and Bayley, and after the match, Damage Control took their revenge with a backstage attack. This attack targeted Bianca's knee, which had been injured during SummerSlam, but Fightful Select has confirmed that this injury is just a storyline and that Belair isn't actually hurt. The report adds that Belair has been written off of TV and that the plan had always been for her to take some time off, but it's unclear just how long she'll be out of action. Depending on who you ask, Belair could be out from a few weeks to possibly 3 months, but what we do know for certain is that the EST remains very popular behind the scenes with management. Belair got constant praise within WWE during her title reign for the insane media schedule and community events she would take part in, and we'll have to see how long she's gone for. In the meantime, Belair will still appear in commercials for Slim Jim and Snickers, but won't be on WWE TV in person, leaving fans waiting patiently for her return to action. This weekend, WWE will host its Payback Premium Live event, and while the show will feature quite the card, Intercontinental Champion Gunther won't be around. On Raw, it was confirmed that Gunther will defend his title against Chad Gable on next week's Raw, raising questions as to why this match isn't happening at Payback. When BWE, a proven WWE insider, was asked about this, it was revealed that this is a Triple H call, as he doesn't want this weekend's event to be overbooked. It's an interesting strategy by the game, considering that at this time there are just 6 matches for the show, a relatively low amount, even for a B-tier event such as Payback. On social media, fans made it clear that they're not thrilled at Gunther being snubbed from the event in Pittsburgh. Gunther's next title defense will be against Chad Gable and will be on next week's Raw, and would you rather see this showdown at Payback, or would that event then become overbooked? As we reported yesterday, Xavier Woods took a desk chair to the face during this week's Raw in a spot with Drew McIntyre that is believed to have been a complete accident. McIntyre even checked on Woods during Raw, a sign that the spot wasn't planned, and now this unfortunate situation has resulted in Woods missing ring time. On social media, Woods said that he is not medically cleared to wrestle for the next week, which is a huge disappointment for Woods, who was hoping to compete on his birthday next Monday. Woods reportedly suffered whiplash due to the incident, but there's no reports of any heat on McIntyre at this time, and we're wishing the New Day star a very speedy recovery. When Tiffany Stratton accidentally listed Becky Lynch as a former NXT Women's Champion in a recent promo, the man was quick to correct her, saying she hasn't held that title yet. Many saw this as Lynch wanting to challenge for the gold and make a return to NXT, and with Stratton appearing on this week's Raw, there's growing speculation that a feud will happen. Now, WRKD Wrestling has reported that there are indeed plans for a Stratton-Lynch feud, and this could be what's next for the man after her story with Trish Stratus ends at Payback this weekend. During her initial promo, Stratton took aim at some of the greatest NXT Women's Champions, and while that list doesn't include Becky Lynch, the man may be changing that in due time. Back to Raw, as Tommaso Ciampa picked up quite the victory this week over Big Bronson Reed, but you may not have known this at first if you'd only been listening to the show. After Ciampa's victory, the Blackheart celebrated in the ring, but some fans were confused as a production error resulted in the wrong theme song being played. Instead of Ciampa's normal entrance music, WWE accidentally played his old Renegade music instead, and there's no word as to how such a simple production error happened during the show. Clearly, somebody in WWE's production truck needs to be paying more attention to what songs are played on TV, and we imagine this somebody got a stern talking to after such a noticeable botch. At AEW's All In, the company boasted an incredible attendance number of 81,035 people, and this huge number left some questioning whether it was legitimate. After all, WWE has often inflated their attendance figures to make their shows look even bigger than they are, but Tony Khan isn't using any form of inflation or manipulation at all. PW Insider confirmed that the 81,035 number of attendees at All In was 100% legitimate, and AEW refrained from factoring in complimentary tickets, visitors, or anyone other than those who'd paid. Compare that to WrestleMania 32, which included everyone in the arena, including staff, and their alleged 101,763 number, which WWE now touts as an all-time record. With that said, ex-WWE writer Brian Gewirtz has said that Vince McMahon doesn't care about AEW's record-breaking attendance, but we'll have to see how true that really is in the coming years. For years, Brock Lesnar dominated the world of UFC like few others ever have, and though his days in the octagon are history, Brock remains a very legitimate athlete. At UFC 200 in 2016, Lesnar made a return to UFC to defeat Mark Hunt, but his win was rescinded when the Beast tested positive for performance-enhancing substances. Next year, UFC will celebrate its 300th event, but when Dana White was asked about Lesnar competing at the event by Sports Illustrated, the UFC president had his doubts. He said, "Brock looks good, doesn't he? He always does. I think Brock's done. I don't think he ever comes back." Lesnar isn't the only name White isn't interested in booking, as while Ronda Rousey is reportedly hoping to have a comeback fight at UFC, White has said that she has no shot of that happening. Lesnar isn't expected to appear for WWE anytime soon, but is advertised for WrestleMania 40. And do you want to see Lesnar back in the octagon for one last fight? Sound off in the comments below. For years, Awesome Kong was a force to be reckoned with, and this week, it was confirmed that she will be coming out of retirement to compete one more time. Kong will be in action next week for the first time in 3 years as part of the 1000th episode of Impact Wrestling, and will certainly make an impact during a historic night for the promotion. When Brian Pillman Jr. left AEW earlier this year, speculation grew that he would soon be part of WWE, especially after being spotted in Florida and after he spoke of a huge opportunity. Now, PW Insider has confirmed that Pillman is signed with WWE and finished out his independent appearances earlier this month with a loss to Kerry Morton in Charlotte, North Carolina. The report adds that there's no rush to get him on TV, as WWE wants him to get comfortable in the Performance Center first, but fans can expect the ex-AEW star on programming in due time. Over to NXT now, as you never know who may show up on Tuesday nights, and this week saw the Street Profits make a return to the Gold brand. The former Raw, SmackDown, and NXT Tag Team Champions were in a backstage segment with Carmelo Hayes before diverting their attention to reigning NXT Tag Champions Tony D'Angelo and Stax Lorenzo. Although their interaction seemed nonchalant, the Profits did mention that if they ever return to NXT in the future, they might take a look at how the champions are faring with the Gold. There has been a lot of buzz surrounding the Profits ever since they aligned with Bobby Lashley, and while the Almighty wasn't at NXT, don't be surprised if all three men appear more on Tuesdays. Speaking of NXT, North American champion Dominik Mysterio will have quite the role next week, but the self-professed hardened criminal won't be competing. Instead, Dominik will serve as the special guest referee for a number 1 contenders match between Dragon Lee and Mustafa Ali, and has vowed that a clean finisher and clear winner will be decided on his watch. In 2019, Bray Wyatt's The Fiend first appeared on TV, and it was at that year's Raw reunion that The Fiend took out Mick Foley using the latter's signature mandible claw. Well, it turns out that this was a spot Foley was delighted with, as in his Facebook tribute post to Bray, Foley revealed that Paul Heyman called to ask him if Wyatt could use the mandible claw. Foley was immediately on board with the idea, as well as the idea of Bray using the move on him, such as the respect that Mick had for the late wrestler. Unfortunately, some have tried to cash in on Wyatt's tragic passing, with a bootleg memorial t-shirt being sold online, featuring various pictures of Wyatt as well as his ring name and real name. It's sad that some are trying to use Bray's death to make a quick buck, and if you do wish to buy a Wyatt shirt, we recommend buying from WWE, who will be donating all proceeds to Bray's fiancée JoJo and his children. When Triple H took over as head of creative, many were optimistic that this would mark a new era of WWE storylines, and the angles seen on screen did improve considerably. With that said, not everything is perfect under Triple H's watch, at least according to Vince Russo, who said on the K100 podcast that talent are still terrified to pitch ideas. According to Russo, who claims he is in contact with a couple of WWE superstars, talent fear that one bad pitch will result in them being fired, and added that he doesn't know how anyone can work like that. Russo said that when he was running creative, there was constant talks with talent about their creative direction, but that just isn't the case anymore, according to the controversial wrestling personality. And we're ending with Lacey Evans, who has left WWE, and it wasn't long after her exit that the sassy Southern Belle teased opening an OnlyFans. That hasn't happened, but this week, Evans did open her Fan Time account, and is working under her real name, Macy Estrella. The former superstar is charging fans $10 a month for exclusive content, though her biggest fans can pay $47.95 for 6 months or $71.92 for a year, with the latter being a savings of 40% off. Estrella has already over a dozen posts on her Fan Time account, but there's no confirmation at this time as to how many subscribers she has already accumulated. Wrestling fans may remember Fan Time as the platform that Mandy Rose hosts her content on, which has earned the former NXT Women's Champion millions of dollars from subscribers. As to whether Macy Estrella will have the same success, time will tell, but fans will be able to see plenty more of the former superstar if they pay for a subscription.